Hello and welcome to episode number 31 of In Pursuit of Clarity, entitled, Are We Ready for Disaster? Whether it's the coronavirus or some future virus, whether naturally evolved or man-made, or total economic implosion, or domestic civil wars, I sense that most people recognize we are a world on the brink at the moment. One way or another, this house of cards, pieced together in such a slapdash manner, is teetering on the verge of collapse. Not just in the US, but virtually everywhere. One of the most important tasks of leadership is to, in effect, prepare for winter. To have contingency plans in place for any possible worst-case scenario, and to cultivate some robust structure capable of weathering such storms. As nations become less unified and familial in nature, and their citizens treated more like atomized and disconnected cogs in an economic machine, I think we've lost sight of these foremost responsibilities. As the ranks of rootless money men and internationalist cosmopolitan types gained in influence and grew in number, they've created production and trade structures that allow for maximum profit, and the most effective means of essentially fleecing nations, and their creators, workers, and producers. It's said that we now rely on China for approximately 90 to 95% of our vital antibiotics and our most needed medications. For decades, we've been reliant on other nations for our energy needs, and we've also outsourced several aspects of the major technological shifts taking place, as the rollout of 5G so well illustrates. This is absolute madness from any objective perspective. The most powerful and wealthy nation in the world, with countless options available to chart its own course and determine its own destiny, allowed itself to slip into near total dependence on other nations. And this macro picture mirrors the micro picture if we zoom in from the geopolitical scene and look at domestic politics. Our leadership isn't inspired by some deeply held patriotic or nationalistic sentiment, and they themselves seem to admit, especially on the left, that they no longer even prize their own citizens above those of other nations. At a superficial glance, this might make sense to some, especially after taking in decades of the most aggressive propaganda speaking on the supposed dangers of nationalistic sentiment and attempting to frame the world as a global village. We're all just human beings, so the theory goes. Why should one be worth more than another? But this is a mischaracterization, a misframing of this extremely dangerous mindset. And I'd like to explain the how and why in a simple and straightforward manner that should make immediate sense to all. Picture a family in which a father took the same approach, and genuinely felt no more or less love or caring or devotion for his own children than he did for children of other parents. Would it be fair of him to devote significant attention to the education and development of his children, without committing an equal amount of time and energy to other children? It wouldn't. He couldn't play favorites, of course, so he'd have to try to take the time to understand every child that comes across his path, to best provide guidance, instruction, and pass on his wisdom and life experience. Of course, this approach is absolutely impossible and doomed to failure. And even if this father had near infinite hours in the day and could be in all places at once, would the teaching or learning process be as meaningful or profound to either father or child? Or would this just be one more relationship of many, no different than any other, no more or less special or valuable? Moreover, a father has an innate genetic connection to his child, making him uniquely capable of understanding his personality, his likely strengths and weaknesses, traits and tendencies, because many of these will mirror his own. One-on-one devotion yields immense benefits, for these reasons and so many others. It's natural and healthy. It works. There's no better proof than comparing children from households with two loving and devoted parents to those who completely lack this blessing of a head start in life. When these two groups are compared, the gulf between them across virtually every objective metric aimed at measuring health or happiness in life is immense. There's simply no replacing the natural sentiment a parent holds for their child, no way to artificially spur this depth of feeling. And this makes perfect sense. We're each allotted our own garden to till and cultivate in this life. And our families, especially children, and those we have the most control and influence over, are the best examples of this. This framework allows us to focus, to be masters of this specific domain, as opposed to a wild and inefficient dissipation of energies in every direction. For the most part, nations and peoples were led and governed in a very similar way throughout history. People sought leadership that cared genuinely about them first and foremost, and had reason to care. Such a leader wasn't attempting to spread himself thin and play this father role for all peoples everywhere, nor could he. Each nation, just like each household, has its own unique set of issues and challenges, and its own demographic, its own prevailing culture and personality. To be an ideal father, he'd need to understand his own household from the ground up, and find the best specific solutions for its specific challenges. There are no one-size-fits-all plans of action here. No singular style of leadership or governance that works equally well across every situation through time and space. Focused and personalized energy and attention is always best. And this needs to come from a source that truly cares, and has reason to care for those under his responsibility. But something very strange happened from approximately post-World War II forward. With regard to selecting our leadership, we began to gravitate towards prizing intelligence, and far worse, perceived intelligence, over character and intentions. In other words, a man perceived to be educated and intelligent suddenly had a far greater chance than a man with the most genuine intentions and upstanding character if this latter man weren't able to present the image of being intellectually well polished. It's my contention that this was a devastating development, and one that we've long been paying for, and one that we might soon pay for much more dearly. As the media helped pave the way for this shift in consciousness and perspective, they simultaneously granted themselves immense power as kingmakers. They became a tool capable of almost effortlessly swaying any election, because not only were they capable of helping craft the public perception of any individual or candidate, but the meta shift away from individuals who cared deeply for their people and nation, and towards the self-proclaimed elite or intellectual class, allowed a new culture of puppets and actors and errand boys to rise to power throughout all levels of government in virtually every Western nation. And again, on its surface, this can seem logical, even natural to many. After all, what could be more important than intelligence and education in such a weighty role? And there was a time in which I think this was, at least to some extent, true, back when intelligence was more equivalent to actual problem-solving ability, and the term education was a more accurate and meaningful concept, and our universities weren't breeding grounds for leftist revolutionaries. But let's pull back a bit. A modern leader, especially someone in a position as powerful as the President of the United States, is inevitably beset on all sides, from day one, by an endless succession of temptations and shrewdly crafted compromises, pitched by some of the greatest manipulators and deceivers in the world, many of whom have devoted their lives to this craft. So skilled, in fact, that they're able to frame things, like the compromise of one's nation for personal gain, as something completely different, something palatable to the public, or even cheered on by a public, under the misapprehension that what's being done is somehow for their benefit. This is the defining challenge of modern leadership, namely keen judgment and discernment of character and motives of others. And it has to spring from a capable and healthy and generally well-oriented leader who sincerely cares to better the lives of those he's working for. What happens when you have the intellect and education coupled with a lukewarm feeling or even an active dislike towards the citizenry they're governing? How might this leader deal with the nonstop series of temptations, with the powerful attempts around every corner to manipulate? Recent history seems to prove that this intelligence is simply used to more efficiently hide the corruption engaged in, to create a more convincing facade while industrial-scale theft and parasitism takes place behind the scenes. Our modern notion of gravitating towards leadership that reads a teleprompter with the greatest eloquence, or has the longest list of credentials from institutions and organizations that couldn't possibly be more subverted and controlled, is dangerously misguided. Most truly effective leadership requires determining consensus opinion of those with clearly positive motives, relevant experience, and track records of success. Meaning that most presidents, for example, make use of those around them to guide them into making the most prudent decisions. This notion that a high IQ is the most important factor anymore is a bit ridiculous. For example, place your average modest farmer with minimal education but a deep love for his nation in that role, and he'll likely seek the opinions of those he comes to feel the most reason to trust, and likely make many good decisions accordingly. Place an Obama or Clinton or Biden-esque modern Ivy League graduate in the position, and they're likely to put any intelligence they might have to work with others like themselves to find new and creative ways to fleece the nation, for the benefit of themselves and their circles of friends and associates and benefactors. And this isn't a wholly partisan issue. Both sides of the political aisle have become completely infested with this latter type of individual. And it truly is madness. And this madness has real-world consequences, of a type I hope we don't have to endure in their most extreme form. The discussion of a global pandemic begins to put such things into perspective. No wise or prudent leadership would ever outsource the production of our most important medicines, or medical technologies, or energy production, for that matter, or open a nation's borders, destroying quality of life, unity and cohesiveness, and undercutting their own citizens. In fact, if one were developing a guide on how to best destroy a powerful nation, these things might be at the top of the list of to-dos. We may still end up dodging the bullet with regard to the coronavirus, or at least avoid the entire civilized world being thrown into chaos and disorder, or a resulting transition into some form of slavery to a technocratic merchant class and the marionettes who puppet them. If we do dodge this bullet this time around, lessons must be learned, and they must be learned now. This level of herd-like behavior and abysmally poor judgment is now a serious existential threat to all of us. If power and influence isn't once again restricted to those capable and deserving, who treat the role not as a profit or self-aggrandizement opportunity, but as the greatest of all responsibilities, I strongly believe the entire world will suffer for it, to an extent not experienced before. And not just a loss of life, but death of spirit, vitality, true creativity, our potential to envision and create beauty, and that all-important internal spark that makes life worth living. This is our fight. And that's all for now. Thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my